Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. As his health deteriorated, he became increasingly dependent on my mom, Sarah, for various needs. Prior to this, she had never been a particularly caring person and fully exploited his disability and mobility issues as his condition worsened. For years, she claimed to be separated and divorced, engaging in online conversations with other men. She frequently declared her intentions to move away and marry someone else. Moreover, she took advantage of him financially. We explored every legal avenue we could find to have her removed from the house, arrested, or forced out, but our attempts were met with responses that it was a civil matter and nothing could be done. Dad made me his durable power of attorney and added me to all his accounts. This is just a small part of her abuse, but I assure you her actions were nothing short of neglectful and exploitative. I had tried for years to convince Dad to move in with me, but he was adamant about staying in the house he had worked so hard to pay for. "Son," he'd say, his voice weak but determined, "this house is my life's work. I can't just leave it behind." I brought him home on hospice care on February 28, 2025, and did everything in my power to ensure his final days were as comfortable and peaceful as possible. After meeting with the funeral home to carry out his final wishes, I was informed they required consent from my mother for the cremation. When I approached her about it, she initially refused. "Cremation? Absolutely not," she snapped. "I won't allow it." It came as no surprise, but she eventually agreed after I allowed her to keep the Social Security survivor benefits, which would have been hers anyway. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You can cremate him, but I'm keeping every penny of those benefits." I wrote Dad's obituary and deliberately left Sarah out of it. There wasn't a single word or mention that he had ever been married or had a spouse. I didn't believe she deserved to be recognized or viewed as a grieving widow when she had spent their marriage being a terrible spouse in person. She was furious when she saw the obituary, and there were numerous questions from friends and family. "How dare you!" she screamed over the phone. "I was his wife for 40 years!" "A wife in name only," I replied coldly. I've spent years in therapy working through maternal narcissistic abuse, and I firmly believe that if she didn't want me to talk about it, she shouldn't have done it. When people asked about the obituary, I was honest about the years of abuse my father and I had endured from her. "Why isn't your mother mentioned in the obituary?" a family friend asked gently. I took a deep breath and replied, "Because she doesn't deserve to be. She abused and neglected Dad for years. I won't pretend otherwise now that he's gone. I've completely shattered the public image and victim complex she had spent years cultivating. I might be seen as the villain in this scenario, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat. My dad deserved better, and I refuse to let his memory be tarnished by her false grief." The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd witness something so shocking in my quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and I was out for a walk when I saw the whole thing go down. There's this sweet older lady named Margaret who lives down the street. She's in her 70s and uses a wheelchair due to severe arthritis. Everyone in the neighborhood knows and loves Margaret. She's always got a kind word for people and often sits out on her porch waving to passers-by. So I'm walking by Margaret's house and I see her out front struggling to get her wheelchair up the slight incline of her driveway. Before I can offer to help, this other woman comes storming up. I recognized her as Karen, a newcomer to the neighborhood who'd already made waves with her entitled attitude. Karen marches right up to Margaret and starts yelling, "That's my wheelchair! I've been looking everywhere for it! How dare you steal it!" Margaret looked absolutely bewildered. "I'm sorry, but this is my personal wheelchair. I've had it for years," she tried to explain calmly. But Karen wasn't having it. She kept insisting the wheelchair belonged to her grandmother, who had recently passed away. Margaret again tried to point out that this was her own chair, even showing Karen where her name was engraved on the armrest. Instead of backing down, Karen completely lost it. To my horror, she actually grabbed Margaret and started trying to forcibly remove her from the wheelchair. Margaret cried out in pain as Karen roughly manhandled her fragile body. I rushed over, shouting at Karen to stop. But she was in such a frenzy that she shoved Margaret fully out of the chair, sending the poor woman tumbling onto the concrete driveway. I heard Margaret cry out as she hit the ground hard. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I yelled at Karen as I knelt down to check on Margaret. She was scraped up and in obvious pain, but thankfully nothing seemed broken. Karen just sneered down at us. "This thief got what she deserved. This wheelchair belongs to my family and I'm taking it back." And with that, she started wheeling the chair away down the street. I was absolutely livid, but my first priority was making sure Margaret was okay. I helped her sit up carefully and called cop to get an ambulance. Margaret was in tears, both from pain and shock at what had happened. As we waited for the ambulance, I saw our neighbor Tom run out of his house. He must have witnessed the whole thing from his window. Tom took off down the street after Karen. A few minutes later, he came back pushing Margaret's wheelchair with a scowling Karen trailing behind him. I caught up to her and blocked her path, Tom explained. Told her she wasn't going anywhere with Margaret's chair. She tried to make a scene, but I just kept repeating that I saw the whole thing and would be happy to tell the police. Karen stomped her foot like a child. "This isn't over. That chair belongs to my family and I will get it back." Thankfully, the police arrived along with the ambulance. I gave them a full account of what happened, as did Tom. Karen tried to spin some story about Margaret stealing the chair, but it quickly fell apart under questioning. The officers examined the wheelchair and found not only Margaret's name engraved on it, but also documentation inside a pouch on the back with her name and medical details. They asked Karen if she had any proof the chair belonged to her family. She blustered and made excuses, but of course had nothing to back up her claim. In the end, Karen was arrested for assault and attempted theft. As they put her in the cop car, she was screeching about how we'd all regret this and her lawyer would make us pay. Margaret was taken to the hospital to get checked out. She had some nasty bruising and was pretty shaken up, but fortunately no broken bones. I visited her the next day and she was in good spirits despite everything. "I just can't understand why someone would do something like that," Margaret said sadly. "Even if she truly thought it was her grandmother's chair, why not just talk to me about it calmly?" I shook my head. "Some people are just entitled and think the world owes them whatever they want. I'm just glad you're okay." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of police statements and legal proceedings. Karen tried to fight the charges, but between multiple witness accounts and security camera footage from nearby houses, the case against her was rock solid. She ended up pleading guilty to lesser charges to avoid jail time. The judge gave her 200 hours of community service, mandatory anger management classes, and ordered her to pay restitution to Margaret for her medical bills. The icing on the cake was that Karen's husband was so mortified by her behavior that he filed for divorce. Last I heard, she'd moved out of the neighborhood. Good riddance, if you ask me. As for Margaret, the whole ordeal actually brought the neighborhood closer together. We set up a rotating schedule to check on her and help out with errands and yard work. She's become like a grandmother to all of us. Sometimes I still can't believe that something so crazy happened on our quiet little street, but I guess it just goes to show that you never know when an entitled Karen might strike. At least in this case, justice prevailed and the good guys won in the end. The next one is a petty revenge story. Got gas at Costco yesterday. I was at the rearmost pump on the island. I filled my tank as usual. Not 30 seconds after getting back in my car, a member of the I'm More Important Than You Club honked. He was in the car directly behind me. At first it didn't even register that he honked at me. I mean, who would do that? Then he honked again. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw him behaving in a frustrated manner. Cue petty revenge mode. When I fill my tank, I record my mileage, the cost per gallon, how much I spent, etc. I made sure to take my sweet time doing that. After a bit, the car immediately in front of me was ready to go, so I turned on my engine. I made sure to take as long as I possibly could to leave the pump, thereby preventing Mr. I'm More Important Than You from getting around me to the free spot in front of me, and at the same time preventing him from quickly pulling into the spot I was vacating. Honking at me cost him an extra 60-90 seconds of his life. I was amused at his being a self-centered jerk. I wonder how he perceived it. The next one is a malicious compliance story. People asked, so I'm sharing a story from 20 years ago. I was a developer for a large financial services company, and because we lacked many tools, I was usually tasked with building various tools, scripts, reports, etc. to help automate the environment and really just worked around the inadequacies of our off-the-shelf tools. At my peak, I probably had around 300 apps and/or scripts in production. Due to the number of asks from leadership and to keep the lights on, I usually booked anywhere from 4 to 10 hours of overtime per week. After about a year, I got a new boss who decided that she would ensure that I take no overtime for any reason. She proclaimed that I would only be allowed to 8 hours per day and not a moment more. No exceptions. I wasn't a full-time employee, so I didn't have any grounds to push back. I usually started at 8, so with my 30-minute lunch, that meant my new hours were 8 to 4:30. Flash forward to later that same week. An upstream system changed their data feed, and it corrupted one of our downstream systems. Stuff like this happened often enough that I had translation tools built to resolve any of those feed-related issues, but even then, I still had to spend a few minutes figuring out what changed in order to adjust my own code. Anyway, as the operations have come to a halt, my boss and her boss are looking over my shoulder as I'm diagnosing the feed problem, which I found pretty quickly. The clock strikes 4:30 and I lock my computer, stand up from my desk and say, well, it's 4:30, that's my 8 hours, I'll see you tomorrow, and walk out. The look of confusion, rage, and exasperation was just blow chef's kiss. At this point, all of our overnight backups have stopped and will not run until I resolve things. This means a global financial institution no longer has any data backups being made for that entire night and will be completely screwed if, well, anything happens. Flash forward to the next morning as I walked to my desk at 7:56, as I made sure to never be in a situation where I could be called out as coming in late. My boss's boss is waiting for me. He directs me into his office and very calmly says, "Moving forward, I'll manage your timesheet and you can take as many hours as you need." I left that job about 5 months later, and the entire building was laid off about 2 months after that. Only 2 of about 200 people weren't laid off, and one of those people was the guy I hired to backfill me as someone had to keep all the code running. The next one is an entitled people story. I debated telling this last story after the whole saga with my mother-in-law and ex-wife, but I mentioned it before so many times that I may as well tell it, but it'll probably be my last post here. I know it seems I dealt with a lot of terrible people in my life. I suppose I was just a magnet for it. My terrible mother, my terrible ex-wife, my terrible mother-in-law, passed away before becoming ex-mother-in-law, bad coworker that gave out my phone number to my mother, and lastly some bad roommates from my college days. But beyond all that, I haven't really dealt with much anyone else of note. I've got good friends, a good job, and I'm physically active, but there were times I was just drawing in narcissists. Hopefully no more. Back in college, I had to deal with 3 bad roommate guys for 6 months. It was community college, so no dorm, just a rundown apartment that looked right out of the 80s. I was balancing school and part-time work, so didn't have a lot of money. Funny thing is, I was literally the only one there who knew anything about cooking, much less did dishes. I wasn't one of those hardcore couponers, and there was really only 2 good stores in biking distance. One a typical supermarket, the other a small discount food store. That's where I went the most. I was also no stranger to the local thrift store. My roommates mostly ate junk food or whatever else they could grab that was already made, so for obvious reasons, I couldn't keep leftovers. We also had fights about them not doing their share of cleaning, but that was resolved later as well. 2 of these guys said they were friends before college, and the 3rd roommate fit right in with them for a while. The drama over the food first started when I made myself an egg sandwich for breakfast. 2 eggs over easy or medium, with your choice of cheese, bread, and mayo. It's actually pretty good, and a solid breakfast. One of my roommates saw me eating it, and asked for one too. I apologetically said no because I was on a tight food budget and the frying pan was already in the sink. He rolled his eyes at me and groaned. I told him they were easy to make them himself if he bought the ingredients, but he balked at the notion. Another day I made mashed soft-boiled eggs for breakfast. That attracted more attention. It's eggs boiled just enough to where the whites are cooked, but the yolk is still liquid. You then peel the shell off and mash the eggs in a bowl with a fork. It can be easy to mess up, and I only really succeeded half the time. But it's great with just basic seasoning and sometimes hot sauce. Haven't made it in a while, but I like to eat it on toast, and sometimes over rice. I also made egg salad from time to time. Eggs were cheap and basically $1 a carton at the discount store. I'm also not a big fan of cereal as I had to eat it a lot growing up, and prefer a warm breakfast without a lot of sugar. No matter how much I told my roommates they could cook their own food if they let me show them how, they just kept complaining that I made food that they weren't allowed to eat. Even though they wanted to eat good food at home, they were completely unwilling to put in any effort. Compared to these guys, I was the only broke person there. They all had the latest gaming consoles and new laptops. One of them even had a car. I had an old N64 and CRT TV that were pity gifts from friends years prior, a GameCube I'd splurged on, and a used laptop I got secondhand. My roommates were near constantly gaming, watching YouTube, and being general couch potatoes when not in class. I think they thought I'd be a pushover at first. But I'm the kind of guy that seems chill till you push me one step too far. And they did this by stealing my game systems and my food. Here's what happened. One evening I made something good for my dinner. Don't remember specifically what it was, but it might have been tilapia fillets. I ate those a lot, even made them into spicy fish burgers. My roommates all ganged up on me over how their dinners always sucked unless they ate out. Microwave food all around for them on many nights. And they wanted me to finally make something nice for everybody. I told my roommates that if they each kicked in $5, I'd make us all a nice spaghetti dinner the next day. They agreed. My biggest mistake was not collecting the money from them in advance. I went out and got some ground beef, a jar of sauce, a loaf of garlic bread, the noodles, and canned green beans for a side. I whipped up a great dinner, but when I wanted the money from each of them, they laughed at me and refused. They played what they did off as a joke. When I didn't accept that answer, they told me that they were sick of me flaunting my cooking around them and never sharing it. I gave them all the finger and told them I'd never cook for them again, and I stuck to that. They tried several more times, and I always refused. They even offered to pay me again, but still refused to pay me for the first time, so I'm sure they would have just pulled the same stunt again. Money or no money, I had my pride, and I meant it when I said I'd never cook for them again. They started acting like kids whose parents wouldn't feed them around me, and were pretty angry when I called them out on it. I wasn't obligated to be their caretaker. I didn't know what kind of homes these guys came from, but they certainly weren't used to not getting their way. One day I came home from work and found all my food missing from the fridge and cupboards, and none of my roommates were home. I was furious and couldn't even confront them, so I just tried to go play video games to unwind. But my consoles were missing. I lost my mind. I went to see an acquainted neighbor living in one of the apartments down the hall and asked advice from him because he was the one who sold me the GameCube. He had an evil idea and said he'd use his digital camera to record my roommates when I confronted them, if I wanted, but only if I paid him $20. I didn't really have a choice but to agree. When my roommates finally came back, they were all smug, until they realized their gaming consoles and laptops were all missing. They flipped out, threatening to kick my ass, but I held my ground and told them I wanted my stuff back, or I'd never tell them where their stuff was. Turns out they bagged up all my food and threw it in the dumpster outside a few hours earlier. Then they hid my game systems and TV somewhere in the building before taking off to a party. I asked them why they did that, and they claimed it was because they had been drinking all day since it was a weekend, then tried to say it was just a stupid drunken joke, while also telling me I'd gone too far. I laughed and said they were enormous hypocrites and a-holes to say I went too far after what they did. I just got even. One of them looked like he was ready to hit me, and I drew all their attention to the nearby window. That's when they all saw our neighbor outside the window recording everything with his digital camera. He gave me an okay, and took off down the fire escape before my roommates could do anything. I told them that guy just recorded their entire admission. That was bullying, theft, and underage drinking since we were all under 21 at the time. I told them I'd take that recording to the dean if they didn't make things right, because they wouldn't like having that stuff as part of their records. It was well known a couple of girls had been ousted from the college for roommate bullying the previous year. And drinking while underage is also a huge no-no. They all looked like the color had drained from their faces. I told them I wanted my stuff back now and the cost of my food reimbursed. It was their move. They all took off outside as fast as they could. They came back with my game systems and games in a garbage bag and even retrieved my food from the dumpster and expected me to just take it. But I refused to touch the food because it had been in the garbage for hours and I would only accept cash. Additionally, they dropped my TV and it was broken, so I wanted that replaced too. They all hemmed and hawed, but finally asked me what I wanted. I said I wanted a new TV and $60 cash from each of them. They asked why that specific number. I said $50 each to replace my food they tossed, $5 each for the spaghetti dinner that they'd reneged on paying for, and then what remained for having to pay a guy to wait for 2 hours outside our window in the cold to record them. They all got their wallets out and begrudgingly gave me the money. They had all previously bragged about how they had parents and scholarships footing their bills, so they easily had the cash. After getting paid, I told them where to find their stuff I'd hidden, and they stopped bothering me. One of them had a small flat-screen TV in his stuff and just gave it to me to replace what they broke. And then we called things even. But after that, they avoided speaking to me if at all possible. Though eventually they all started getting on each other's nerves since I'd ruined their fun. They also never brought alcohol into the apartment again for fear I'd snitch. And they did try to harass the guy I'd paid to record them. He said he'd take the recording to the dean himself if they bothered him again. So they were so well to do anything about the situation. When the lease renewal came, 2 of the roommates opted to move out of the building because they and the third guy now hated each other. Yeah, they all hated me. But the 2 that left were especially the worst. But they liked each other just fine. Didn't bother to keep tabs on them once they were out. And the few classes we had together they kept away from me in. And the one roommate that stayed actually made some improvement as a person, and made sure to tell the new guys who moved in not to mess with me at all. One of them was pretty cool though, and he actually liked cooking simple home meals like I did. And he also liked Nintendo and bikes. He became my best friend, and still is to this day. We even still play Mario Kart together when we can, and took up cycling together again once I separated from my ex-wife. He's been my greatest support ever, more so than any family I've ever had. Also, for those wondering where I'd hidden my roommate's stuff, I hid them all in their own suitcases that were already put away in the closet, which would have been one of the last places they'd have looked. They were all so pissed it was all right there the whole time. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.